Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Game of Thrones Season 7, Episode 4, The Spoils of War. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Game of Thrones, so I have to start with a spoiler warning for Game of Thrones up to Season 7, Episode 4. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So okay, I'm not going to mince words. This episode was awesome. Not only did it have one of the best battle sequences in the entire series, but we also got the Stark family reunion that we've been waiting for ever since Season 1, and also a lot of overall interesting character building scenes. This episode, I feel, exemplifies the type of pace I was hoping for in Season 7, where every scene is great and contributes to the overall story, action or not, and everything just adds so much and is executed so incredibly well. That being said, there were a few nitpicks I had, mainly dealing with the lack of clarity over a few things, but overall, still a very amazing episode. So jumping right into it, let me start with the Winterfell storyline, which begins with Littlefinger giving Bran the Valyrian steel dagger that was used in the failed assassination attempt on him in Season 1. So in Season 1, after Bran was injured from his fall and it was uncertain if he'd survive, a cutthroat started a fire in Winterfell to draw people away and then snuck into Bran's room, which he thought would be empty, but Catelyn was there. He referred to killing Bran as a mercy and then proceeded to try to kill him, but Catelyn, with a little help from Summer, managed to stop him. Catelyn, recognizing the dagger as being too wealthy to belong to a common cutthroat, suspected the Lannisters were involved, so she rode to King's Landing and showed it to Littlefinger, whom claimed the dagger was his, but Tyrion had won it in a bet, and this led to Catelyn falsely accusing Tyrion of the assassination attempt. So the question of who really sent this assassin has remained a matter of debate and speculation for many years, as some say it was Cersei, some Littlefinger, and others say it was Joffrey. As in the novels, King Robert expressed that he thought Bran should have died as a mercy rather than living in this coma or crippled state. So the theory is Joffrey sent an assassin in order to gain his father's favor or do his wishes, but of course none of this happened in the show. So, who sent the cutthroat to kill Bran was not answered, but I do get the distinct impression that Bran knows, as it's been established that Bran can see everything, but when Arya asked him specifically who sent the cutthroat, he simply said, someone wealthy. Well, no shit, Bran, but who? I have a feeling that we will find out soon enough, but for some reason the show doesn't want to tell us yet. At any rate, we knew Littlefinger had the dagger last, so here we see him giving it to Bran and feeding him a song and dance about how he cares about his family. And the whole time I'm just thinking Littlefinger has no clue who he's talking to, as Bran can see everything, so he can see right through all of his bullshit. However, I think Littlefinger begins to get an idea of who he's dealing with when, after he mentioned chaos, Bran responds by saying, chaos is a ladder. Now, this scene reminded me a lot of the scene in Season 5 when Melisandre said, "You know nothing, Jon Snow." This was a big shocker, and you can see Littlefinger was really taken aback by this. So there's been a lot of magical and mysticism that we've seen in this show over the years, such as fire-breathing dragons, a woman who can walk out of a fire unharmed, a race of necromancers that can animate the dead to turn into their own personal army, and who can also change babies to become them, an ancient race of forest-dwelling creatures with magical powers, giants, men who can put their minds into animals and control them, kids who can have visions of the future, fire priests who can bring people back to life, and create shadow creatures to assassinate people. However, in all of this magic and mysticism, Littlefinger typically is not involved, nor does he really witness any of it. He's more of a straightforward kind of man that deals with real-life political maneuvering, and he does it really well. So the question is, how will he react when confronted with genuine magic or mysticism? So far, we've seen that he doesn't really take the White Walker threat seriously, which isn't too surprising, as he has no real reason to. But the question is, is how will he respond to Bran quoting his infamous line, which describes his whole backstabbing strategy. The thing about Littlefinger is he may not put much stock into magic, but he's not an idiot. I think he'll believe what his eyes and ears tell him, and in this case, it's that there is a lot more to Bran than meets the eye, and he knows a lot more than he might think. So although Littlefinger doesn't take the White Walker threat seriously, I think he will take the Bran threat seriously. In fact, I think the whole point in meeting with him was to assess him as a potential threat or a piece that he can control, as Bran would technically be next in line for Winterfell, which could be a threat to his plans to keep Sansa in charge. But he learns that Bran isn't a threat in that regard, but he could be a threat in other regards. So then we get the scene I read about in the plot leaks all those months ago, but I betted against this scene happening because it sounded so dumb. And after watching it, I feel it is every bit as dumb as I thought it would be. And I am, of course, referring to Mirror saying that she's leaving for no good reason, really. Oh, because she wants to be with her family, whatever that means. In my predictions, I said she'd return home to gather the Krennic men to bring them north to fight against the White Walkers, which would make a lot more sense, seeing how she knows how big of a threat they are, but I suppose that could be implied with being with her family, but I don't think so. And I guess it does make some sense seeing how sloppy, rushed, and out of nowhere her introduction to the show was in the first place, that her exit would also be just as sloppy, rushed, and out of nowhere. Now, will we see her again? I kind of doubt it, because it seemed to me the writers simply don't know what to do with her anymore, so they just write her off kind of like the way that they needlessly killed Summer. But she's not dead, so maybe she could return, but I doubt it. Anyway, it's interesting. She's like, you don't need me anymore, and he's like, yep, you're right, you're useless. So she obviously gets pissed off, and Bran is just like, oh, well, thanks. And so basically Bran's being a dick, and when she rightfully points this out and refers to him as Bran, he says, well, I'm not Bran. Not really. And that he remembers what it was like to be Brandon Stark, and she points out that Bran died in the cave. So that's really interesting information to have, which I think makes everything a bit clearer involving Bran, that he has really become this strange, non-feeling three-eyed raven and isn't really Bran anymore. So then we see Arya finally arriving in Winterfell, and we get a scene I feel was a bit too reminiscent of a scene in season 1 where Arya wandered outside the Red Keep while chasing a cat, and when she tried to re-enter, the guards thought she was a commoner and refused to let her in. In that case, she whined and threatened and told them that who she was and that her father would have their heads if they didn't let her in. Whereas here, she kept her cool and was just straight with them. I'm just a bit iffy on the scene overall because I thought the guards were being incredibly dumb, as it was beyond obvious from Arya's calm and proud demeanor that she was no common girl. And although it's natural to assume the guards wouldn't believe anyone claiming to be Arya Stark, someone who many believe is dead, it still felt like the only purpose this scene that went on far too long served was to give us a callback to season 1. But that's just my thinking. So we get the Arya and Sansa reunion when Sansa finds her in the crypt, exactly where she thought she'd find her, and they reminisce a bit, but not too much. They still don't tell each other what they've been through entirely. But one important question Arya has for Sansa is if she killed Joffrey like the people are claiming. So it's interesting that was what was foremost on her mind. And when Arya mentions her kill list, Sansa laughs like she's joking. Arya just laughs back, willing to play along with this. But then Sansa tells Arya that Bran is back as well. And when Arya smiles, Sansa doesn't and shoots her a look that clearly indicates something is wrong. He's turned into this weirdo creep. So then we see All three surviving younger Stark siblings reunited, and Bran, of course, starts being all weird and telling Arya things that he shouldn't know, which seems to be what he's doing with everyone. But Arya takes it a lot better than Sansa did, although to be fair, he wasn't being nearly as creepy with her as he was with Sansa. At any rate, Bran mentions Arya's kill list again, and this is when Sansa realized that she wasn't joking, and the look on Arya's face was gold as well, as it seemed she would have been happy to let Sansa keep believing it was just a joke, but Bran just blew her cover. Geez, thanks a lot, Bran. So anyway, when Sansa asked her who's on the list, she replies that most of them are dead now anyways, which is true, but I would have expected her to mention some people that she had killed already, like Walder Frey, but didn't, so it gets a bit frustrating how much these three are holding back from each other. Bran wouldn't give any specifics on who sent the cutthroat to him. For that matter, he knows what Littlefinger is scheming and that he can't be trusted, and that he was the one who betrayed their father that ultimately got him killed in the first place, but he says none of this. Arya doesn't mention anything about her training with the Faceless Men and how she is a very effective assassin who killed all of the Freys in the Riverlands. And Sansa, I'm sure, could tell them more about her time with Cersei and Littlefinger and how she's learned to become an effective schemer as well as an effective leader. So, point is, all three of these people are different now, but they're only communicating this on a surface level and are still holding back a lot, which is frustrating. But I guess, the show doesn't, it just shows that they don't trust each other yet. At any rate, Bran gives Arya the Valyrian steel dagger, which isn't too surprising because he doesn't need it. But I do wonder if this is foreshadowing that Arya will be going up against the White Walkers, who we know are vulnerable to Valyrian steel. I don't know. We'll just have to see. So then we get this training scene where Arya insists Brienne spar with her. Now, I remember reading about this in the plot leaks, and I didn't think this was a big deal. Oh, Arya and Brienne spar, so what? But actually seeing it, I do see that it is, in fact, a big deal. I absolutely loved this scene. It was so amazing to see Arya not only hold her own, but basically beat Brienne, who has been shown to be one of the best warriors in Westeros. It was so great seeing Arya show off her skills to Brienne, and she was really impressed. It was cool when she asked who taught her that. She answered no one. I don't think Brienne caught the double meaning, but that was cool. So I did find it interesting that when Brienne was beating up Podrick and kept telling him what not to do, Arya said, "Don't fight someone like her in the first place." But that's an odd thing for her to say, considering that that's how she became a warrior that she is today, by fighting people better than her, like Cyril Farrell, the Hound, Thoros of Myr, and of course the Waif. And the main way she learned was by getting her ass kicked repeatedly, so she should approve of what Podrick is doing. At any rate, what makes this scene even more interesting is that Sansa and Littlefinger are watching her, and so they both know what she can do. For Sansa's part, she looked very disturbed with what she saw, and who could blame her? First, Bran comes back acting like a total creep, and she learns he has these seer-like powers, and he knows everything that's going on. And then Arya returns, and she finds out that she's this badass fighter who's apparently killed a lot of people on her kill list. So you can't blame Sansa for being a little freaked out by how much her siblings have changed, and she doesn't even know about the face changing thing yet. I suppose Arya is saving that for a big shocking reveal. As for Littlefinger, I get the sense he's just feeling out these other Starks and trying to learn as much about them as he can. I don't think he feels threatened by Arya, but more of is thinking of ways to use her to get what he wants. As he said in previous episodes, he's trying to see every possibility at once, and everyone is a potential ally and everyone's a potential enemy. However, again, I don't think Littlefinger realizes yet just how dangerous she is, as Arya, for her part, doesn't think very highly of Littlefinger. Littlefinger. He was never on her kill list, but if Bran ever tells her about the part he played in their father's death, perhaps he will be. It is interesting that after Arya left King's Landing, she did in fact run into Littlefinger at Harrenhal when she was pretending to be Tywin Lannister's cupbearer, and she was afraid he would recognize her and rat her out. But he did recognize her, but didn't rat her out. As in Season 3, he did mention that he saw Arya to Sansa to let her know that Arya is still alive. I do wonder if this little bit will come up again, and perhaps Littlefinger will try to use that to insist that he can be trusted because he didn't give her up when he could have, but we'll see. So moving on to Dragonstone, we see Missandei bragging to Daenerys about getting it on with Grey Worm and stuff. So now let me spend like 10 minutes talking about this. Now, just kidding. Who cares about this? So anyway, Jon comes up to her and shows her all the dragon glass and, more importantly, the ancient cave drawings from the Children of the Forest that depicted the Children of the Forest coming together with the First Men in order to defeat the White Walkers. And the speech, I feel, was a very effective one. Daenerys seems convinced, as she said she will agree to help him fight, but then adds the important condition that she'll do it if and only if he bends the knee. And I'll be honest here, I think this approach is way better than the approach that Daenerys took in the previous episode. She's kind with him, she hears him out, and she even refers to him as king in the north, but still insists that he bend the knee. And that's fine. In fact, that's very reasonable. So I suspect her being an idiot was only for that other episode, and from now on out she's going to handle the situation a bit more like she should. However, when Jon points out that he's afraid his lords would reject him if he did that, which is fair because his leadership position is rather tenuous to begin with, she urges him to not let his pride get in the way of helping his people. Now this is where I'm going to have to disagree with her, as if there's anyone in that cave who is full of pride, it most certainly is not Jon. I mean, is Jon the one that has someone announce him with 50,000 titles every time he meets someone new? No, he isn't. Jon clearly isn't doing anything out of pride, as being king actually means nothing to him. He's just trying to do what's best for his people, and he's still not convinced that bending the knee to her is what's best, which is fair. So when Tyrion and Varys come and let her know that she has no allies now because the Lannisters sacked Highgarden, and she is understandably pissed. I love how when Davos is like, perhaps we should just leave you guys alone, she's like, no, you stay. No doubt she wanted another opinion because so far Tyrion's opinions were not working out very well. In fact, when Tyrion suggested they push forward with the siege, she's like, no, your plans have lost me all my allies. And then she went as far as to question him that he was holding back or even helping his family because he didn't want them hurt. And I actually think there is some truth to that. I mean, he obviously wants Cersei defeated and he wants Daenerys to rule, but he wants it done with as little bloodshed as possible. And it's not just for political reasons, but also because deep down, I think he doesn't want his own people killed. Even though they had forsaken him, he still doesn't want to see them dead. And perhaps he's not even aware of this, and this is more of a subconscious feeling. But Daenerys very wisely recognizes that it's time to stop listening to Tyrion and show her true strength, just like Lady Olenna had suggested. However, her idea to attack the Red Keep with her dragons, and she asks Jon Snow about it, who wisely advises against it. So we don't really see where the decision process goes from here and whose idea it was that instead of attacking the Red Keep, that she take the Dothraki to attack the Lannister forces on the road while they're transporting their plundered goods from Highgarden. This scene was left out for dramatic purposes, so the next scene where Jon meets Theon, we don't know Daenerys isn't there until it's mentioned, and we don't know where she had gone until she shows up to attack the Lannisters. And I do see why they did it that way, as it does actually work in ramping up the tension in this episode. However, on the other hand, I still would have liked to have seen this conversation take place and see whose idea it was. Was it Jon's, Tyrion's, Daenerys's, Varys's, or some combination thereof? Would have been good to see. Perhaps this will be elaborated on in the future episode. We'll see. So then we get a scene of Davos and Jon reminiscing about Dany, and Jon says that she has a good heart, and Davos is like, yeah, I saw you staring at her good heart. Now that was a really funny line, I must admit. I chuckled at that, and I liked it. But the foreshadowing is reaching cliche levels now that Jon and Daenerys will get it on. Some fans were hoping this wouldn't happen, but now it's pretty goddamn unavoidable. It's just inevitable. I don't think it could possibly be, the foreshadowing for this could not possibly be any thicker. And then they run into Missandei, and although last week I said Davos definitely was not hitting on her, this week I'm not so sure. Regardless, after talking to her for a while where she explains their devotion to Daenerys is true and by choice, I think Jon is starting to think more highly of her. This may lead him to bend the knee after all, but we'll just have to see. So then Theon shows up with the Ironborn, who for some reason are following him. I guess he's still technically the heir to the Islands, even if he's a bloody coward. And Jon is there to meet him and grabs him and says that if it wasn't for what he did for Sansa, he would kill him right then and there. Despite the fact that he knows that Theon's not responsible for killing Bran Rickon, although to be fair, he still took Winterfell, which forced him to flee, and he killed a lot of people in the process. So I can understand him still being mad. However, killing one of Daenerys' key allies on her island while he's a guest there, not such a great idea. In fact, I'm surprised Missandei, whom I'm assuming is in charge while Daenerys is absent, allowed Jon to rough him up like that, but whatever. Theon wants to talk to Daenerys about rescuing his sister, which is interesting because I do wonder if anything will come of that, but then we get the reveal that she's not there and the great transition to the coming battle. But before I get into that, let me backtrack a bit and cover the scene where Cersei meets with Tycho Nestoris again, whom seems thrilled about working with her in the future and is happy that she plans to pay him back in full. And note Cersei talks about reestablishing control over the entire continent, and that most certainly includes the North. So perhaps this is the reason why Jon should support Daenerys in this fight. I mean, Cersei talks about hiring the Golden Company, and I have a feeling it's to go specifically north because I don't think she has any intention of sending her own troops that far. However, there's this line where Tycho Nestoris is like, I will support you as long as I get my gold. So that seems very obvious foreshadowing that Cersei would not get this gold. In fact, I said this in last week by watching the promo for this episode. However, it turns out I was wrong because in the scene at the end of the episode, Randyll Tarly clearly states that all the gold has been safely transported behind the walls of King's Landing. So I suppose while Jaime and the others were staying behind gathering all the harvest from the Reach, a group went ahead to transport the gold to King's Landing. I mean, Randall did mention they were stretched really thin, but it does really disappoint me that it is the case. It seems like for some reason or another the writers wanted Cersei to get the gold, but what she does with it is another question. Whether the Iron Bank will support her payment or not, or support her after her payment after she suffered such a magnificent defeat is another question still. But backtracking a bit more, we get a scene at the start of the episode where Bronn gives Jaime shit even after he hands him this big ass bag of gold. And I'm surprised it didn't have a dollar sign symbol on it. But anyway, Bronn's not satisfied because he still hasn't gotten a castle. And frankly, I think he's completely justified. I recently rewatched season 5 where Cersei gave Bronn a castle with a wife. Well, granted, he had to kill her older sister and make it look like an accident before could actually get the castle, but he'd have no trouble doing that. But Jaime came in and took it away from him as he arranged for her to marry someone else, and he presented it like it was good news. Hey, good news, guess what? That castle you thought you were going to get, you're not going to get it. And then he said that he would get a better wife and a bigger castle. And after all that, he traveled to Dorne with him, where he was nearly killed several times, and then accompanied him on a siege to Riverrun, where he had to take over for the idiot Freys, and then to Highgarden to storm a castle. And after all that, Bronn is still worse off than he was before Jaime came and took everything away from him. I mean, a big bag of gold is nice, but Bronn is dead right. It's not a freaking castle. But Jaime promises his pick of castles once Cersei wins the war, and I love Bronn's response, where he sarcastically joked about there being, peace and prosperity under Queen Cersei's rule, and Jaime's like, "Oh, stranger things has happened," and I love how Bronn replied by saying, "Like what?" Meaning Bronn is not being as naive and blind as Jaime is in regard to Cersei. So then we come to the big battle sequence, and it was absolutely positively glorious. I've been waiting 7 seasons to see these arrogant, stuck-up Lannisters who stole the throne that never fucking belonged to them by scheming and backstabbing men and women who were much more honorable than they could ever hope to be, finally getting their just desserts. And Jaime in particular, I've been waiting to see this stuck-up, arrogant, kid-crippling, cousin-killing, sister-fucker finally get the pasting he deserves. And the battle itself was right up on par with the previous battles, such as Battle of the Bastards, Blackwater, and Hardhome in terms of quality, stunts, cinematography, editing, music, special effects, sound, everything completely and totally top notch. I love the Jurassic Park style opening where the ground is shaking and I could hear the distant thunder of thousands of horses galloping towards them as they got closer, and the sound of the Dothraki whooping. The sense of foreboding was just so rich and so greatly pulled off. I love the touch of showing the Lannister soldiers literally shaking in their boots while they tried to hold the spear. And even Jaime was like, "Oh, we can hold them off." But then Drogon came flying in, and he had to know at that point that they were totally fucked. And as I said, the battle scenes were absolutely exquisite. Seeing Drogon light things on fire, blow up the wagons, and then see the Dothraki right through the fire was simply amazing. It was so great seeing the Dothraki in full battle situation, as their fighting style is completely different than anything we've seen on the show before. And I love how the Lannister army were so ill-equipped to handle this fighting style. They were so used to the, typical Westeros fighting style, which is more uniformed and more sort of standard, whereas the Dothraki are much more wild, but in an effective and organized way. Seeing them jump on their horses and fire arrows was great. I love the shot of the one Dothraki who just leaped off his horse beyond the shield wall and just started ripping into the Lannisters. Now, in season 1, there was a scene where Jorah was talking to a Dothraki about armor and how they help protect against Dothraki weapons, but the Dothraki soldier retorted that armor makes a man slow, and we see here that is the case, as although the Dothraki were fairly easy to kill without armor, they ultimately had the advantage because they were much quicker and more mobile and were able to outmaneuver them. And this, I think, was helped by the fact that they weren't used to the Dothraki fighting style. And of course, the flat lands terrain was a huge element in their favor as well. And on top of that, they had a fucking dragon to contend with who was simply just wiping them out. I particularly love the scene where Bronn tried to reach the Scorpion, and they had this handheld, gritty shots that were very reminiscent of the shots in Battle of the Bastards, where chaos was just exploding around Bronn as you followed him. You had this Dothraki chasing him. You had the Lannisters on fire, bumping into each other, and Drogon flying overhead as they ran. Cinematography alone was absolutely genius, not to mention all the stunt work, the special effects, music, the editing. This episode deserves to win all the fucking awards, not just a few Emmy, all of the awards. But it was also really interesting that Bronn lost his bag of gold, and it would have been easy for him to just pick it up and run away. And I feel most sellswords would do that in this kind of situation, but it just goes to show the kind of integrity he has to want to stick through and do what Jaime had ordered him to do regardless. And seeing Tyrion just gasp in horror at all of it while the Dothraki guy was like, oh, your people don't fight very well. Where he sees all these Lannister men, perhaps people he might have known growing up, just burned alive and slaughtered in the most horrible ways. And you could tell how broken up he was about it. And again, this isn't to say he wants Cersei to win. He absolutely doesn't. And he does want Daenerys to win. But he also probably wanted to avoid something like this. And actually seeing his people be slaughtered was probably very different than simply hearing about it. And seeing the Scorpion in action was cool as well. Some more beautiful shots of Bronn operating it and Drogon destroying it. I mean, seriously, cinematography in this episode is better than any movie that I've seen all year, let alone any TV show. Anyway, it was a great way to build tension because I was really scared that Bronn would kill Drogon, which would really suck. However, he did enter him, which added a lot of tension as Drogon had to settle down for Daenerys to pull the bolt free, which of course left her vulnerable, and Jaime saw this as an opportunity. Now, I'm sure Jaime saw Daenerys as another Mad King, as he killed the Mad King in order to stop him from burning thousands of people alive, and that's what Daenerys was doing here. Not that I agree with him, as the real Mad Queen is the one he's sleeping with, as she was the one who burned thousands of innocent civilians alive, whereas Daenerys is simply using a powerful weapon at her disposal in combat. Totally different situation, but regardless, I can see where Jaime is coming from and why he would have this point of view. And I absolutely love the scene to death. It was an amazing way to end the episode with Tyrion be like, flee, you idiot. And when Jaime charged at him, he was like, you fucking idiot. That was spectacular. And again, you can never fault Peter Dinklage on his acting, as you could tell he generally did not want to see Jaime killed, which he would have been killed had it not been for Bronn, who popped out of nowhere to save him in time. And again, this was such a beautifully shot scene. The way the episode ended with Jaime sinking in the water was brilliant, but I do think Jaime will not die. Of course not. The whole point of him missing the dragon fire was to show that he survived. Now, it does seem unlikely that he wouldn't just drown as he's weighted down by all that armor, and we see him sinking pretty deep. But again, Arya should have died when she was viciously stabbed by the waif last year. So there's that. So now that I drooled all over the sequence and just talked about how blown away I was by it, how amazingly awesome it is, let me now get into a few nitpicks that kind of bothered me. Most having to do with something I think should have been made a bit more clear, such as if the gold, how did the gold get to King's Landing, and how much of the Lannisters' forces were defeated here. I mean, I think this kind of should have been clarified a bit more. I think that one line of Randall Tarley, like I watched that one line of Randall Tarley like over and over again, like 10 times to try to glean the information. I don't think it was as clear as it should have been. Was it all of them? Was it most of them? Was it a small portion? Are the Lannister forces really decimated because of this, or was this just a tiny portion? You do have to think that it should have been the majority of them if Jaime and Randall Tarley were both with them. They talked about how they were stretched thin, so the wagon trail could have went on for miles, but to be fair, this may all be cleared up in the next episode. I certainly hope so. But the bigger issue that bothered me was, why was Daenerys burning all the wagons? I'm pretty sure it's implied that the wagons are full of all the food from the Reach, and even earlier in this episode, Daenerys talked about how she wouldn't be able to feed her own troops without all the food from the Reach. So why would she fucking burn it? It's not just her own troops, but the Reach is like the less plentiful region in the entire continent, as Dorne is just this desert. The Riverlands are like a wasteland after the previous wars, and Northern Kingdoms are facing harsher winters already, so why the fuck destroy your last great food supply? Granted, she doesn't want the Lannisters to have it, but why not then simply steal it after defeating the Lannisters? That would seem to be the much smarter thing to do, as what she's really doing is condemning thousands of innocent small folk to starve to death, unless the show is trying to imply that she didn't destroy all the food supply, just the ones in that little area, since, they said that the wagon trail was really thin, so it could have been across for miles, and that there's simply more wagons out there, and that she will steal from those. But still, either way, that's got to be a lot of precious food that she just wasted for no good reason. Anyway, my rating for the Spoils of War out of 10 is a 10, the best. Now, bear in mind that I don't do decimal points, so I round up or round down my scores. So I was given a choice between a 9 and a 10, and given that choice, I'd go with the 10. So I'm not saying that this episode gets a perfect score, but I do consider it the best of the best, and thus worthy of my highest rating. As I said, there were a few nitpicks I had with this episode, but overall, the good far outweighs the bad, and there was just so much in this episode that was simply pure gold. I had to acknowledge how groundbreaking, breathtaking, amazing this episode was. So that's it for my review of the Spoils of War. Be sure to check back here in a couple days for my weekly live discussion. Although Atkin Tomko won't be able to join us this week as he's away traveling, but I will be joined by Max from Buzz Talks and perhaps some other special guests as well. So be sure to join us for that. Also, later in the week, I'll be doing a further analysis video on this episode where I'll get more into spoilers and the fan reaction of this episode. And of course, next week, I'll be back with my review for episode 5. So be sure to check out my channel for all of that, as well as many other videos that I do on other shows like Star Trek, Dark Matter, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.